Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Scott Shafer in for Thuy Vu. Coming up on our program, cannabis at a crossroads. Oakland's controversial plan to level the playing field in the marijuana industry. And a new report assesses how diverting felons from state prisons is affecting crime rates. Plus, we talked to one of the Bay Area's 2016 MacArthur geniuses about how his program is changing lending practices. But first, this week, California's state treasurer announced major sanctions against San Francisco-based Wells Fargo Bank. This comes in the wake of revelations that bank employees created some 2 million fake accounts without customers' knowledge. As part of the unprecedented move, the state will discontinue investing in Wells Fargo securities and stop using the company to underwrite certain bond deals for at least 1 year. California is the nation's largest issuer of municipal bonds, and the sanctions could cost the banking giant millions. And State Treasurer John Chiang joins us now. Welcome.
Happy to be with you, Scott.
Tell us, what is the message that you're sending to Wells Fargo by suspending this relationship?
I want to send a clear and strong message that their behavior is impermissible, it's abhorrent, it's reprehensible, and that they need to clean up their culture. You have a storied franchise, grew up with the state of California, helped grow California communities, but today their train is off the track.
And so are there criminal wrongdoings here that, say, the Attorney General, Kamala Harris, should look into?
Well, the law enforcement ought to look at the activities of Wells Fargo. We're going to make sure that, as I've indicated a couple days ago, we're suspending activity because we want to make sure that they get back on the right path.
And is this a symbolic gesture, or is it real punishment? What is this going to cost Wells Fargo?
Well, California is the big actor in regards to municipal finance. We are the largest. So I suspended their 3 most highly profitable lines of business with the state of California. When people say they do business with California, it enhances their opportunities to do business with others.
And so their bottom line, I mean, they have a huge bottom line. How much money are we talking about that's going to cost them?
So we don't know. So the question is, right, which businesses, which opportunities would they have bid for and which ones they would have won? So that's speculation.
So does this mean that they will no longer, as of when? Today, now, yesterday, they'll no longer have any business with the state of California?
Well, I postponed a sale a few days ago. Wells Fargo was going to be the lead underwriter on that project, and so we took them off, and so it's already in effect.
You also left the door open to resuming that relationship with Wells Fargo. We've been doing business with them for 17 years, and we had no idea that this was happening. How are you going to know that they've cleaned up their act, or how are you going to know that another bank, Chase, JP Morgan, whoever, isn't doing something similar or worse?
We're going to monitor them to make sure that they're following all the enforcement actions against them. We're going to continue to make strong queries as to whether they're following the rules or not.
How are you going to know that? You don't have investigative powers yourself.
Yeah, well, we're going to track very closely. They are subject to liability with the SEC. We are an investor. That's one of the things I was truly offended by, because we are investors. So they represent promises to us. Obviously, they've breached a lot of those promises. And so we're going to work in concert with others to make sure that they become great actors, that they fulfill their obligations, the good work that they were doing in regards to investing in affordable housing or small businesses. Do good and you will do well.
And what is this going to cost California?
There are 49 other underwriters in the pool, so we're going to encourage them. We're going to track them, make sure that we get competitive bids. We've dropped down the cost of borrowing for the state of California since I've been the state treasurer for a year and 3 quarters. We've saved the taxpayers of California over $4 billion in public benefit.
So this transition isn't going to cost anything?
We don't think it is, but we're going to make sure that we drive the others so that we get great bids.
The company and the CEO, John Stumpf, have become really like a human piñata up on Capitol Hill. Is there any indication that they have not done a good job for the state of California? Not in those lines of businesses that we've taken them, suspended their actions. We've kept close track. We've monitored their activity. The way we've changed practices at the Treasurer's Office is that we do competitive negotiated selections of our underwriters, so that if you do well in a competitive, we'll look favorably, perhaps. But you've had no indication up to now that they've been screwing up in some way?
No.
Yeah. As treasurer, you sit on the boards of the large public employee pension funds. They have some $2 billion of investments in Wells Fargo stock. Would you lead the charge to divest?
So I'm leading the charge to make sure that we have the proper governance reforms in place. You don't get independent judgment, you don't get independent thought, independent review when you have the CEO and chairman as the same person. And so I am pushing CalPERS and CalSTRS that we have in the past, but here in this case with Wells Fargo to make sure that we separate those positions.
Would that affect other banks as well?
Yes, it would.
Yeah. You are a candidate for governor. You've announced you're running in 2018. To those who would say, well, he's just politically grandstanding here, what would you say?
I think I've shown that I'm tough in regards to the state's finances, so Wells Fargo may be this week's issue, but if you look in the past, I took on Governor Schwarzenegger when they missed on the budget. I took on the legislature when they missed on the budget. I took on the insurance companies when they wouldn't pay the beneficiaries the monies they were owed. I audited the city of Bell, set new records for audit findings. My job, because I've held all 3 finance offices in the state of California, is to make sure that Californians and California are on the right track to financial prosperity.
Do you have any Wells Fargo Visa cards in your wallet?
I do not.
And no accounts at all personally?
I do not.
It's hard to avoid. I mean, they're a huge bank in California.
That's right.
All right. State Treasurer John Chiang, thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks, Scott.
Turning now to our continuing coverage of cannabis at a crossroads. The city of Oakland has a controversial new plan to regulate marijuana businesses. Half of new permits to operate a marijuana business would go to the perceived victims of the war on drugs, residents who've been jailed for a marijuana offense or who live in parts of East Oakland. At a Tuesday meeting, Oakland City Council member Desley Brooks said this so-called equity program will level the playing field for the cannabis industry in Oakland.
By the end of 2020, this will be a $44 billion industry. And when you look at this industry across the United States and in Oakland, the vast majority of people who are making money in this industry are white males. We need to make sure that there is equity in this industry, and we need to make sure that Oaklanders have an opportunity.
But some think it could exclude the very people it's trying to help.
There are many other people throughout this entire city, from one corner to the other, who are actual victims of the war on drugs, who you are choosing to turn a blind eye to and be callous and completely uncaring to. It's without reason.
Joining me now to discuss this unusual program are Rachel Swan, San Francisco Chronicle Oakland reporter, and Terryn Buxton, the owner of a cannabis business in Oakland. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
A little complicated, this program, so why don't you begin, Rachel? Tell us a little bit about it. What is it intended to do exactly?
Well, this is, ostensibly this is Oakland's attempt to develop a permitting system that is now required by the state and will, allow people to get their state licenses. It's also an attempt to deliver some form of reparations for the U.S. drug war. So Oakland is trying to kind of prioritize permits for people who've, been arrested for marijuana offenses in the past, and for people who live in neighborhoods that were, affected by the drug war.
And so, Terryn, the equity then is for people who have been what? Arrested in the past or unfairly treated?
Arrested and just harassed in general. Cannabis was used by the police to kind of as a gateway into investigating other things for a lot of people, whether it be from pulling people over or smelling an odor outside of the house. They were very specific about how they chose which people to go after with this. And this is certain communities where the police use this as a way to get involved in what's going on in the community.
And so this program would basically give those folks, or tries to give those folks a leg up.
Absolutely. In a lot of places in the country, if you have any convictions or cannabis convictions in particular, you can't get in the industry. So the idea is that there's been people who've been in the industry for many years who were the industry, but now they're being locked out because of these laws in other places. So they wanted to make sure that the people in this community, even if they had some kind of legal issues, were still able to be a part of the cannabis industry.
And this was first announced and passed in May, I believe, and yet these permits have not been offered up. Why is there such a delay? What's holding it up?
What I've heard is the applications are ready to go, and the city is not releasing them because now several council members have come to regret the law they've passed.
And so they're having second thoughts about it, but so they're just not implementing it? It wasn't meant to be implemented now that it's been passed?
I think the city staff is trying to wait to figure out what's going on with the equity program. There's been so much back and forth with people in the community and people in the industry about having issues with it. They want to with city staff wants this city council to kind of get that all figured out before they start issuing the licenses. And
so we heard in the clip there from the councilwoman that the industry in Oakland, although it's really proliferated is largely run by white males. Is that your experience?
Yeah, and this industry in general across country is dominated by white males. There are small companies run by people of color, but in general.
And so this is designed theoretically based on how these lines are drawn and where people live to what? To give sort of a preference, would you say, Rachel, to people of color?
That's the concept. That's the basic concept. I mean, the problem that what a lot of people are saying is that the criteria they've set up are just way too narrow. I mean, they're saying we want half the permits in Oakland to go to people who live in these 6 East Oakland neighborhoods or who've had a marijuana conviction in the past 10 years.
So just taking a step back, it sounds like they're saying if you have a record, a drug record,
yeah,
we want you.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of the opposite of what most other places are saying.
Yeah,
exactly the opposite.
Yeah, and so what are your concerns, either about that or any other aspect of this? You had a chance to speak the other night.
Yeah, I've had a chance to speak the other night, and I've spoken with a lot of people both in the industry and in the different neighborhoods, and there is a desire to see some kind of balance, something that can help assist the people who are just trying now to get into the industry who previously felt like they couldn't get into it. But we don't want to do it in a way that drives away the current industry, the current companies that are around paying taxes, that are employing people.
By having too many hoops for them to jump through?
Yeah, or just when they start talking about a 25% profit tax or tax on their profits, that's going to scare a lot of companies away. And my understanding is that was just something put on the table to start the conversation, to get people kind of together to start kind of negotiating what's going to work for everybody. But just the sound of that initial 25% just scares a lot of people.
Yeah, and so the fear is what? They don't bother even being in Oakland, go to Richmond or Berkeley or some other place.
Yeah, like other cities are developing their permit systems too, and I mean, they seem to be a lot more lenient. And, you know, the fear is that, I mean, the way this law is currently set up is that the city cannot give out a regular permit until it gives out, it has to give out an equity permit for every regular permit.
And Terryn, that 25%, what is that going to be, like a tax or a hand over our profits if you get one of these permits?
They've called it different things at different points. Right, last I've heard they're referring to it as a tax, and it's just because at first they were saying they're going to take 25% of the people's business, and I don't really know if that was supposed to look like. 25% of the business was supposed to go to the city, and then one of the seats of the board of directors was supposed to go to the city.
Plus whatever other fees you're paying,
yeah,
right?
The normal 5% gross tax and all these other. I mean, it was going to make it financially unviable to be in the industry for
people. So they've dropped that, or
they're using that as a negotiating point. They're trying to get people to the table to talk about what actually would work. I think some people are saying the 5% gross tax would be the equivalent to a 25% tax in general. So I don't know if it was trying to make those line up, or but I know they're definitely want to. The concern, and the 25% tax was just on pre-existing businesses, and the concern was that the businesses that have been here illegally, building out warehouses and kind of prepping for this license, or have a leg up on the people that have been waiting for legality to actually come into place. So they wanted to kind of balance that.
So this program is, Rachel, it's kind of a set-aside in a way. And I'm wondering, are there constitutional problems, whether it's, because it's a kind of affirmative action, perhaps, a preference for these individuals? I
spoke with a lawyer yesterday who said this is flat out unconstitutional. I mean, you can't give preferential treatment to anyone, including an ex-convict. Or a person who lives in a certain neighborhood. Well,
in turn, that sort of brings up the point, too. If they have a record because of the war on drugs, what is going to say whether or not they actually have what it takes to run a successful business?
I think the idea was that they weren't going to make that determination. They just didn't want to lock people out just because of a piece of paper or something that might have happened 10 or 15 years ago. And but
they do get a preference. I mean, if they have that piece of paper.
Yeah. I mean, they get a preference in the sense of, if everything else lines up, if they have a building that's permitted, if the fire marshal signs off of it, if they have a solid business plan, if they meet all the other criteria that everyone else would have to meet, and then they're in line, that they wouldn't have to wait quite as long. Because the idea is that there's hundreds of people who are going to apply for these permits, and quickly there'll become thousands of people applying for these permits, because Oakland's always had a very permissive environment, and the way that we're kind of situated in between Humboldt and LA, it's a hot area for distribution of a lot of other activities.
But one thing that some critics have pointed out is, like, it's one thing to say, hey, we're not going to flat out turn you down because you have a past felony. It's another thing to say, like, we're going to set aside a permit for you because you have a felony on your record.
It's complicated.
What does law enforcement say about this?
I haven't spoken to law enforcement about this. When they've come to our meetings, I think they're kind of trying to go in line with what the city wants. They know that we're kind of pretty far along with the whole cannabis being regulated and it's about to be legal. And I think they're kind of just staying out of the way. I haven't heard a lot of noise from them about this. And then whenever they come to the meetings, they're just nice and
All right, very good. Well, I'm sure we'll be hearing more about this as it gets implemented, if it gets implemented. Terryn Buxton and Rachel Swan, thank you both very much for coming in. Turning now to public safety. Over the past 5 years, the number of people locked up in California prisons and jails has dropped significantly, down by about 30,000 inmates. That's due largely to a sweeping criminal justice reform that Governor Brown dubbed realignment. The idea was to divert lower-level felons away from overcrowded state prisons and toward county jails and probation departments. Voter-approved Proposition 47 decriminalized certain non-violent offenses and put a further dent in those numbers. This week, a new report examines the impact of these changes on crime rates. And joining me now is the co-author of that report, PPIC researcher Mia Bird. Mia, welcome.
Thank you.
One of the goals of realignment way back 5 years ago was to reduce what's called recidivism, that churn of prisoners going from prison to the streets and back again for parole violations. What have you found? What impact has realignment had on that?
Well, we know that realignment reduced the returns to prison dramatically. But in terms of rearrest and reconviction rates, we're seeing about the same levels of recidivism among prison releases as we did before realignment.
And is it the same kind of offenses, the same violation? I mean, why isn't it working? Why isn't the rate coming down?
Sure. Well, I don't think we're quite ready to conclude that it isn't working. We have only been able to look at those released from prison so far, and there's a large segment of realignment population that is held locally and that is experiencing more of the local treatment of realignment. And those are folks that we're just starting to look at the recidivism rates of.
So I would assume that the population in jails, in county jails, has been drifting upwards, especially in counties, not necessarily San Francisco, but depending on how realignment is being implemented. What are you seeing in that regard?
So right after realignment, we did see exactly that. We saw the jail population shoot up. And then with Prop 47, we actually saw a lot of population pressure relief.
And jails are not, unlike prisons, are not built for long-term stays. Is that, how big a problem is that?
That's right. Most of the jails were only built to hold people for a year in terms of having programming space. And a lot of jails are sort of restructuring the facilities they have, especially those jails that have been able to reduce their bed days, and jails that have received new construction money.
And the money is available. They have been getting, because that was a concern of realignment. A lot of the counties said, we don't believe we're going to get the money to implement this correctly.
I think counties have gotten a significant amount of money. I'm sure there are counties that would like more money to support jail construction.
And what about overall spending? You might think that if we're spending more money on preventing crime and rehabilitating inmates, getting them out of the state prison, that overall we'd be spending less money on these kinds of things. Are you seeing that?
Well, unfortunately, we are seeing correction spending overall slowly increasing. And so we're not getting the kind of spending returns that we expected.
Why would it be going up?
Well, you know, we have been a mass incarceration state for decades. It's been a growing problem, and now we are trying to make a transition. And we're trying to really invest in reentry programs and services to change these criminal trajectories. And to do that does cost a lot of money.
So that's where the money's going. It's not that we're building new prisons, we're just spending the money and investing it, you would say, perhaps in rehabilitation, so that when they get out, they're less likely to go back in.
That's the hope.
That's the theory.
That's the hope.
Yeah. What about crime rates? Because people want to know. We hear a lot of anecdotal data about the murder rate going up, or San Francisco in particular, you see people smashing windows on cars. Is that attributable to either realignment or Prop 47?
You know, it was a huge fear in the wake of realignment that having such a reduction in incarceration in the state would really increase crime rates. And we actually only saw property crime rates increase, and specifically motor vehicle thefts. In terms of in the wake of Prop 47, we really don't have the data yet to conclude whether Prop 47 did increase crime rates.
And we'll be looking at that very carefully.
That's right.
Because, I mean, how can you assess the success unless you know the answer to that, right? Of these programs?
That's absolutely right.
Yeah, and that's, of course, something politicians pay close attention to around re-election time as well. What are you going to be looking for going forward? What do you want to know that you don't know now?
Yes, there are a few key things that we want to know. We really want to see what the recidivism rates look like for that locally held realignment population. And even more importantly, we want to see what kinds of reentry programs are effective and help local governments to better target those programs and services. And I think second, we really want to understand the effect of Prop 47 on both recidivism rates and crime rates.
So theoretically, the more data you have, then you can say, oh, this works, that doesn't work, all of you should be doing this or this or this?
Exactly. We can start to, and it's wonderful because we have 58 counties doing different things. That gives us the opportunity to learn a great deal.
Big laboratory.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. And then just quickly, another concern was that a lot of the problems the state had with lawsuits over overcrowding would become county, local problems. To what extent has that happened?
You know, under realignment, those populations did grow quite a bit, and many counties were facing overcrowded jails and some lawsuits. Under Prop 47, that's really relieved a lot of the crowding issues.
So that's less of a problem than it might have been.
It may be less of a problem.
Yeah.
Crowding on the one hand, conditions are another question.
Okay, well, we'll keep watching, or you will, I'm sure. Mia Bird from PPIC, thanks so much for coming in. And now, a man with a mission. Last week, a San Francisco financial expert was named one of 23 recipients of this year's prestigious MacArthur Fellowships, also known as the Genius Grant. José Quiñonez is founder and CEO of San Francisco-based Mission Asset Fund. His organization helps immigrants and low-income individuals build good credit through a unique program that taps into a long-used informal model of community lending. Thuy Vu sat down with him earlier.
Welcome and congratulations to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Your nonprofit Mission Asset Fund really builds upon a community-based lending model, often known as lending circles. And this is a group where people all contribute to a pot of money and then they lend money to each other. Why did you choose to focus on this kind of financial model?
Yeah, you know, the reason why is because when we were starting our work, the conventional wisdom at the time was, you know, they had this notion that people were somewhat just financially illiterate, that they just didn't know enough, or that they were doing everything wrong, and then they just needed us to kind of go in there and help them, set them straight, right? And then, you know, so we sort of deviated from that. Say, actually, you know, if you really look at what's happening, particularly in immigrant communities, there really are financially savvy individuals that, you know, they know more about interchange rates than any of us. I mean, they're managing budgets across households, across countries. So they really are doing a lot of great things, but we never give them credit for any of that. And one of the things that we found out was that, you know, people actually do come together and lend and save money together. And so we wanted to lift that up to sort of start our conversation, you know, there, and then help them use that practice as a way to actually get into the financial mainstream.
Yeah. And a lot of cultures have this, Latino cultures, Asian cultures, my own Vietnamese culture, it's called Hui, lots of different terms,
That's
right?
Exactly right.
And then once you do this, you take it to the next step though. You formalize this with financial institutions so that the participants can have some kind of credit history, so they can have relationships with established financial institutions.
That's right.
How do you do that?
Right. So the first thing was recognizing it as like bona fide financial information, to sort of say this is phenomenal, what people are lending, borrow with each other, but because it's informal, nobody really knows about it except the people within that group. And so what we did was basically formalized informality, right? We formalized it in such a way that we got, you know, all the participants had to sign a promissory note that basically says, I, Jose, promise to pay $100 for the next 10 months. And then that promissory note, sort of like the legal document that transforms it into a viable, visible financial product. And then also gives MAF the ability to then service that loan, collect the payments and make the loan distributions, and also to report that information to the credit bureaus. Because one of the things that we found out early enough was that no matter what we did in terms of helping people develop their financial security, if we did not help them build or improve their credit scores, we knew that, you know, it was all going to be talk, right? Because we know that without having the credit score, the credit report, it's really impossible to do anything in our world today. I mean, without the credit report, people can't even get apartments, you know, or insurance, or in a lot of cases, can't even get jobs, right? So we wanted to address that barrier head on. And so by us reporting it to the credit bureaus, we're helping them build their credit
new
score.
lives.
That's right.
You have an interesting background yourself. Speaking of building new lives, you were 9 years old when you immigrated from Mexico into California after first losing your father and then your mother. How has the immigrant experience shaped your work and your motivation to do this work?
You know, I am an immigrant. I came to this country as a 9-year-old boy, you know, undocumented, you know, and lived, you know, in the shadows of society, you know, fearful of deportation, and that was even taught to me. It's like, don't say a word, don't speak up, make yourself invisible, because we were fearful of that. And so that shaped me in a great deal. But thankfully for me and my family, we were able to get amnesty through that in 1986 law that President Reagan signed into law. And because of that, I was unshackled in a way to basically, live out, the rest of my life here. And so I continued on with my education, went to UC Davis, went to Princeton, worked in Congress. But I never forgot that experience of being in the shadows. And I knew that that there's more to the story that we have of people in the shadows, because I know that people are there are people that are hardworking, people that are dignified, people that really just want an opportunity to really live out the true human and economic potential. So I've dedicated my life, my career, to actually do that for them. And thankfully, through math, through lending circles, I was able to find a very tangible way of actually helping people build their financial security.
What's the default rate like?
Yeah, over the course of the past 8 years, we've managed, over like $6.2 million in loans. We've helped over 6,000 people, and the repayment rate is 99.3%, meaning that default rate is 0.7%. There's a lot of reason why that happens, because people, this is their money. This is the relationships that they're holding true.
They're personally and emotionally invested.
Exactly.
Do you follow up with the participants after they leave the fund? How has this transformed lives?
Yeah, we do follow up with them. I mean, we have a lot of clients that kind of come, and they have a second or third lending circle with us. One story that I always go back to, we had a client who moved from Chicago to San Francisco after leaving her abusive husband, and she came to San Francisco to start her life anew with 2 kids. But because she didn't have that credit report, she couldn't find an apartment. Nobody would rent to her, so she was essentially homeless with her kids, living in couches and couches, or sometimes sleeping on on hallways. But once she got a credit report, she was able to get that apartment, and she came to our office to deliver the news, and she was literally in tears, because her life was transformed because of that.
All right, real quickly, you get a grant of $625,000. What are you going to do with it?
Well, I'm going to go to Disneyland. No, I'm not going to do
and
that.
Then what?
And then what? No, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is it's a phenomenal recognition, the resources, but this is sort of providing like a jet fuel to our work. So I'm thankful that I want to continue to do this work, for years to come.
All right, José Quiñonez, MacArthur Fellowship Award winner, and also leader of the Mission Asset Fund. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. I'm Scott Shafer in for Thuy Vu. For all of KQED's news coverage, please go to kqednews.org.